What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of And Action Filmmaking Podcast. I'm Tommy Nanucci. I'm here as always with my good pal Mikey Messier, and wow, it's episode 75. That's kind of a number to be excited about, right? 75.
I think it's a silver anniversary or some such thing. Yeah, well, that's very exciting, Tommy. At 3/4 of the way to 100, or
Precious
50% more than
metal.
50. Yeah,
There's
precious
there's
metal of some
precious
kind.
metal involved here.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah, I'm
exciting.
excited. I'm excited about that. So this is kind of a fun episode topic that we decided to switch gears. We were going to talk about sound design, which I don't want to say it's a boring topic, but you got to be pretty into it. It's specific because right now I'm going through sound design on literally two different feature films at the same time, and another web series. So I'm kind of in this sound world. But I said, you know what? Why should I bring my daily issues into everyone else's world? Let's talk about something a little more exciting for episode 75. And Mike, the goal here on And Action is to somewhat connect the pieces so that the topics that we talk about have some relatability to what we've got going on in our own filmmaking journeys. So I said, you know what? I'm working on this 1950s period screenplay right now. It takes place in New Jersey in the 1950s, one of the greatest decades in American history, by the way. And I said, you know what? How cool is it as filmmakers that we're really the only people, storytellers in general, that get to travel through time, and on a film, it's so specific because you're really creating that world where, let's say, for example, my movie Vault, we're going to talk about that a lot on the show, but that movie was set in 1970 to 75. And it was really exciting to really dive into that era and, picking out wardrobe. We're going to be talking about picking out the props, and we're going to be talking about what kind of vehicles and cars, different cars that you need. How do you uh, pull off the illusion to the audience that you are officially in a completely different era? It's a really exciting thing, and I can tell you from firsthand experience that when you walk onto a set that's been really well designed and all the actors are in their period costumes, and you look around, you really can almost trick yourself on the day when you're making the movie to like really truly believe that you're in that era. It's kind of an amazing thing. So we really do get to travel through time as filmmakers, and as an audience, you get to travel through time when you watch it. And of course, you don't just have to go in the past, Mike. You can travel way into the future. All these, take Star Trek, for example, that's a period piece. That's, hundreds of years into the future. So it's kind of fun to think you can jump into any era with a good story.
Yeah, and what's cool about that too, Tommy, especially with going into the future, like you said, with the future, it's really up to the creators. You can do anything because how's anyone going to disprove you? As far as the fashion or whatnot, how's anyone going to say, well, no, people aren't going to wear that type of design or clothes in 300 years or 5,000 years? And as far as the past goes, Tommy, I think one thing I've noticed recently, I go to the movies quite a bit. I've noticed that there's a lot of films right now in the theater, Tommy, that take place in different eras. Um, Liam Neeson. I always say his name wrong, but the guy that did the Taken movies and the guy that was in the
Sure.
Phantom Menace. I just saw a movie with him that takes place in 1974. It's not too different from his Taken films, but the point is, with something from the 70s or 80s, you don't have the creative crutch of cell phones floating around. Like no one's in a horror movie that takes place in contemporary times. The question is, well, why not just call somebody if a ghost is chasing you around? But if you put your movie back 30 or 40 or 25 years, then no character has the out clause of a cell phone or some type of mobile device to get out of a
Yeah.
jam.
Yeah, that's definitely a device that can make a writer find themselves in a lot of hurdles and speed bumps. And when you can just say like, well, that technology doesn't exist, then it's all good. I also like the fact that one of the nice things about telling a story in the future is, like you said, Mike, there's the term called extrapolation. Let's look up a little definition.
Oh, gee
Uh,
whiz.
extrapolation.
It's like going back to college at 11
I'm gonna
o'clock in
say
the morning.
extrapolate to
Yeah. Okay.
extend the application or the method to an unknown situation by assuming that existing trends will continue or similar methods will be applicable. And what does that mean? It's basically like, well, when you're telling a futuristic story, it's your job as the writer, as the filmmaker, to take a look at where we're at today and make an educated guess based on the trends as to what's going to happen in the future. And to break that down in a simpler form, it's kind of cool to think about, well, if I was going to tell a story, set 10 years in the future, how about all these fucking Apple goggles that you're seeing everybody make fun of online now? People walking around and bumping into things and all that bullshit. Right now, they're like $2,500. It's very difficult for a consumer to get one. Well, in 10 years, that's probably all going to come down in price, and the technology is going to be streamlined and it will be wireless. And we're probably all going to be walking around with some kind of fucking Google glasses or some kind of device, whatever. So, my point is, when you're telling a story in the future, you take a look at what we got going on right now, and you actually look at the past to tell the future, because you see like how far we've come, and you kind of, in a way, like I said, get yourself an educated guess on what the future is going to look like based on today and based on the past.
Yeah, and there's certain movies, Tommy, that if we watch them now, I think of two. Was it Back to the Future, the second one, the sequel to Back to the Future, which is takes
Back to the
place in
Future
the
too.
right. Back to the Future 2 takes place in the future, and some of the things that movie kind of extrapolated or predicted have come true. And then there was another one that's a little more obscure, but still a lot of people have seen it. Idiocracy, which is a movie about 15 years ago, which kind of was a commentary on how goofy everything is as far as political correctness and different trends. And that movie has proven to be somewhat of a prophecy, to the point where it's no longer seen as a comedy, but it's seen as a tragedy, because so many things that movie Idiocracy predicted have come true for the worse for the most part.
Well, listen, telling stories in the future is a lot of fun. I think that, another thing about telling stories in the past, which is fun, is you get to see how crazy the times were, right? I'm a big history buff. I feel like a lot of, in my experience, a lot of filmmakers are history buffs. We tend to be people that kind of are interested in the past and, the tradition of kind of, it's almost like a ritual when you make a movie. You're like recreating something, you're paying homage to something in a way. So, I've always been fascinated by the past, and I love the idea of period movies because they, like I said, really do transform the audience and pluck them right from where they are sitting in their chair and put them in a different era. And what that does is that just creates this domino effect of nostalgia, where I'm sure we've all had this experience, right? Think back to maybe when you're a kid, you're watching a movie with your parents, or you're watching a movie with your older cousin or uncle or aunt, whatever, and they see something that's foreign to you as a kid, or even as an adult, and it's foreign to you in a movie to see something like that in the past. Like, even if it's something as simple as smoking cigarettes inside, during a
Right.
movie, you see people smoking cigarettes in a restaurant, and then how remember your parents or your uncle or whatever would say, "Oh, I remember that," or "I remember those days," or "I remember cars like that," or "I remember girls would wear dresses like that," or "I remember guys had sneakers like that." Like, they're just so nostalgic. And when you make a great period movie, all those little bells start ringing in people's heads, and it really does help to put them in their own kind of experience of that era, decade, whatever have you. So, to me, I think it's fun. It's almost like smelling birthday candles, and it makes that auditory, you get that auditory memory connection. I think seeing interesting things from the past kind of gets that same feeling with memories. I know it's the same. Like, when I look at, I'm a big, I collect action figures, right? So my way of going back in the past, my way of time traveling, is I'll look up old action figures and vintage toys, and I'll see shit that I had when I was a kid, and it's fucking amazing. I can't even describe it, but like, just seeing like the color of the paint on a certain action figure, and you'll remember it, and you'll be like, "Oh my god, I had that guy. He was like long lost and probably disappeared in my sandbox in the early '90s, but I had that guy." And it's amazing what a visual can do for memories. So I think that's what we all love about these period pieces.
Well, I'll give you credit, Tommy. And with Vault, your movie, what year in the 1970s did Vault take place in?
Well, the cool thing about Vault, Mike, is we actually, we had a little flashback that took place in the 50s. So we got to do like a brief snippet of the 1950s, which, as I said earlier, is, in my opinion, one of the greatest decades in American history, one of my favorite decades. So we got to do a little sliver of that, but then the majority of the movie took place from like 70 to 75. And that's pretty much it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say a friend of mine went to that movie with me the second time I saw it, and he was very impressed and nostalgic because you had the public service announcement on the TV of the Native American with a singular tear for pollution. And that at the time, my buddy informed me, was like all over the place. And that's back when there was, for the most part, three networks. Nobody had cable TV. No,
Right.
there was no internet. So when people watched television, if they were watching the nightly news with Walter Cronkite, or they were watching the World Series, you had millions and millions and millions of people watching basically one of three networks every night. So that commercial or that public service announcement of the anti-pollution was all over the place, and people of that era that were alive and watching TV in North America in the 1970s, that like became part of their daily routine, was to see the singular tear for the Native American. So some of these things, Tommy, got embedded in people's heads, and just by playing that commercial or that public service announcement gave your movie Vault a little bit of more credibility, because people who were in that era recognized it, and it gave them the feels, as the kids say, for back when they were watching TV back then.
I appreciate that, Mike. And I remember when I got that, I was so excited because that was my first time as a filmmaker ever getting an actual piece of media that was from a different movie era time period, like an actual piece of media. Like, I had made a bunch of really low budget movies at the time, so you can't afford to play things from a different era. You can't afford the needle drop or whatever fee you want to call it. And don't get me wrong, that was very affordable because it was a PSA, like you said. Like, it didn't cost us an arm and a leg, but it was still, money had to be spent to make that happen. And I remember like really fighting for that, and I really was so happy when my producers kind of like got behind that idea, and were like, yeah, that's important to have in this movie. So yeah, man, it's all about just like kind of pulling at the nostalgia heartstrings a little bit and getting people into a different zone in their mind. Let's talk a little bit to our and action family here. What's happening, guys? Laza says, good day from Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Good to see you, brother. Laza says, would rather travel back to the past. I live in it enough. Brother, let me tell you, the older I get, the more I'm just living there myself. Would travel back to the pro wrestling territory days. I love learning about that era of wrestling. There's a lot of great movies that I think could be made in the territory era. Ariana, what's up, Ariana? Ariana says, holding out on the Apple contact lenses. Now that would be next level. And let me tell you something, 10 years, maybe not, but 20, 30, it's not crazy to think about that being a possibility. I wonder if there was ever time travel, would we have cops like JCVD and Time Cop? Lazda, I sure fucking hope so. I could only hope we'll have Time Cop running around. With VR headsets like Oculus, we are almost at the stage of a Star Trek holodeck. Brother, I was thinking the same exact thing. We are right pretty much at holodeck level. Like if you were sitting on your couch and you were bored or maybe feeling a little sad, you could probably put yourself on a fucking beach in the Bahamas and just like look around and see the beach. So you kind of are in a holodeck. I guess the next step will be like actually being able to interact with other people while having that fucking shit on. Like if I could have my fucking goggles on and Mike could have his fucking goggles on, could we just like walk towards each other and have a conversation and be in the same room? I mean, like to me, that's what I'm hoping the next level is of that. Like again, Mike's one of my best friends on the whole planet. He lives literally on the other bottom part of the country. I'm on the top part of the country. So if we could put these goggles on and just like hang out and watch wrestling for an hour, that would be pretty fucking cool. You know, it would be really no different than being in the same room. So let's hope it gets to that point.
Let me ask you, Tommy, real quick, just so while we're there, Meta,
Sure.
with our buddy there, what's the progress with that? Is that a thing now? Because I don't do it. But from what I understand, 2 or 3 years ago, what I was hearing was, oh, we're going to set up these virtual playgrounds where you can work in the virtual world all day, or you can hang out. Did that come to fruition? Because I haven't signed on for that.
You know, I haven't heard about that too much. I remember when it was a thing when it first was announced, but I haven't followed up on that. If anyone in the and action realm out there knows anything about Meta, fill Mike in. But let's get back on track here. Let's talk about movies and period movies and some things that you need to think about when you're going to make a period movie. Um, you know, music is big, right? But here's the problem with making a period movie. Uh, a lot of times, like the movie that you're watching will, again, back to the birthday candles reference, music can really bring you back to an era as well. And if you can't afford to get the tracks that actually bring you back to that era, then you're always going to miss the mark a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still have you can still have bands do sound alike tunes, like if you're making a movie set in the 50s, you could maybe you can't afford that Elvis track. You're not going to be able to pay for Hound Dog, but you probably could pay for some rockabilly guitar player and a rockabilly band to like put together some kind of track that reminds the audience of that sound and maybe could have existed in that era. So there's ways around it. But music is big. So, that's something to pay close attention to next time you're watching a period movie. Um, this is an interesting one. I've heard wardrobe is obviously, I would say, almost of chief importance when making a period movie. And that's any direction you're going. You're telling a movie from the 60s or you're telling a movie from the 2060s. You got to have the right costumes. Like I think what makes we talked about Star Trek earlier. I think what makes Star Trek part of what made Star Trek kind of live on so long is, although maybe deemed cheesy by some, like at the end of the day, the costumes were pretty cool. They were kind of these iconic colors. The color scheme was cool. That insignia, the little triangle that's on the crest on their chest that later became like a communication device. I mean, that's cool, right? That's something that, that's interesting. So they kind of took some styles from today, made them their own, came up with that. But I've actually heard from costumers, and that's an interesting food for conversation. I've heard costumers warn me, like I was warned by my costumer Mora when I made Vault, you want to have the clothing be represented to represent the era, but you don't want it to distract.
Okay.
Meaning, don't make it a cartoon of the era. Meaning, if you were to make a movie in the 70s and everybody had loud bell-bottom pants and a big gold chain and a flashy shirt with a massive collar, it might be like, oh, whoa, this is a little too much. Whereas maybe if one or two people in the group had that look, then you'd get away with it. But it was almost like, yes, lean into the era, but don't be a cartoon. Don't become a caricature. I don't want people to feel like, I remember she said, like, I don't want people to feel like they're watching that 70s show. It's not about, hey, everyone, it's the 70s. Let people just kind of come to that realization subtly in a way. So I thought that was really a cool note.
Yeah, to back Mora up there, because I have seen films and TV shows, and that 70 shows is a good example where it's like they're trying too hard. They're trying too hard because the reality is, I think in any generation, any decade or what have you, a certain amount of people were fashionable and with the times. And, in 1984, the guy's wearing the polo shirt with the, alligator on it or whatever. But a good portion of the people are just kind of basic, as the kids say once again. And they're just kind of wearing, clothes that aren't so trendy. There's another thing, Tommy, that a lot of times trends in the early part of a decade are carried over from the previous decade. So if you see stuff, news footage or whatever from 1982, there are still people that have their late 70s gear on because they don't have the money to go out and buy a new outfit every year. So
Mike, that is an amazing point, and you're taking words out of Maura's mouth. That was another thing she said. She was like, "Look, you're telling a story set in Providence, Rhode Island, in the '70s. This isn't Beverly Hills. Everyone's clothes, people, especially in that era, they're not buying new clothes every year. The pair of pants they've had for 3 to 5 years. That their nice shirt is the same nice shirt that they've had for 3 to 5 years. So it was pretty cool to hear all that. And I love the mental math behind making a period piece. That's the part of the movie that I get really excited about. Figuring out like, ooh, how do we really it's a fucking magic trick, right? Like at this
yeah.
point, you hear movie magic, man. There are few departments of filmmaking that are less magical than, or I should say, that are more magical than the costumes, because pulling off the era, it's all about what they're wearing. So that's very important. Next time you watch a period movie, take a look at them costumes, and it'll be interesting to see. Like, I feel like if you're watching a period comedy, you'll probably see goofier, more loud, in your face, leaning into the era type clothing. If you're watching a period drama, it'll probably be dialed back a little bit and a little more subtle. So that's something to watch for next time you're watching them throwback period movies.
Tommy, let me give you a couple of examples real quick. In the last 3 movies I saw, William Shatner's documentary, You Can Call Me Bill, which is a documentary, but they got footage from Star Trek and TJ Hooker. And so in this documentary, which uses actual clips from Shatner's career, you can see all these different trends and the Star Trek stuff you talked about. And then in the movie Love Lies Bleeding, it's kind of this set takes place in 1989 in New Mexico. Well, here's the thing: people in New Mexico in 1989, it was very sparse. It wasn't New York City or Los Angeles. There wasn't a whole lot of people, and the people that lived, according to this film, in New Mexico in 1989, they weren't trendy. They weren't people that were running around with the Sony Walkman or the
Exactly.
the leg warmers like they were, in the movie Flashdance or something. These were people that were going to the gym. They were working class people. The movie takes place in the summer, so everybody's kind of dressed to t-shirts and shorts because it's so hot. But yet the movie still did a good job with the timepiece. And then the third one I'll discuss, I just saw it a few nights ago, was that Liam Neeson movie, In the Land of Sinners and Saints. Well, this movie had two challenges, Tommy. It takes place in 1974, and it also takes place in good old Ireland. So now the filmmakers have to convince us, and I thought they did a nice job, that we're both in 1974 and we're in the country of Ireland, in a very small little rogue town where everybody kind of goes to the same bar, every night. What do they call it? The pub over there,
A pub.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So all the villagers are going to the pub every night, and there's killers and everything else in there. But the point is, now you've got to mix in a non-United States location with the time travel, with the period piece. So you're right. If you're looking for a challenge as a filmmaker, as a producer, or as a director, or as a wardrobe person, this will give you a challenge.
Yeah, and let's talk about some. We're going to talk about some preparation activities. How do you prep? So let me tell you a little something about what I got going on, guys. The movie business is the craziest game you can play sometimes, and I think that's why I like it. I don't know. Consistency is a great thing, and I think everybody wants that in life. And as an artist, that's all you can hope for, right? Is to have any kind of consistent work coming in. And since the strike, I have to say, man, I'm so happy to see that, like, the phone has been kind of ringing quite a bit, and I'm mapping out my summer, which is crazy to think that here we are in 2024 and we're already mapping out a summer. And something kind of came to me, which I can't really talk a whole lot about it because we haven't made the announcement yet. So I don't want to, just don't want to say too much, but I got brought on to do this project that I'm just so excited about. It's an amazing project. It's based off of a book, and it's set in the 1950s. It's about a group of football players from the 1950s, and it's a coming of age story. And I'm just so excited for it. And I'm just starting to write this thing, and I'm really starting to outline it and figure out all the different directions that I want to go in. I've been having a lot of conversations with the gentleman who wrote the book, and we're really hitting it off. And he's a great guy, and we've been having a lot of nice conversations. And this is sort of based on his life a little bit, so he's been just giving me tons of insight on the era and on his life. And I'm at the point now where, all right, how do I prep for this? What do I do? So here's some of the things that I'm going to do. Again, this is where we're going to bring it all back around full circle. We're like, this is what And Action's all about. We're taking action in a project right now. We're going to be talking about it on the show. So I have to tell a story that's set in the late 1950s, 1958, 59 to be exact, which is a very interesting era because it's actually kind of like the dying days of kind of what was considered to be like pure Americana, because we all know that the 60s are going to come along and literally tilt the fucking world on its axis. Vietnam's going to come along, hippies, whole different generation. But the idea of, seldom do we take days off from work. We work our ass off every single day. Kids, you got to be in school, respect your parents, respect your elders, go out in public. If you're making a public appearance, you better have a nice jacket, nice pair of pants on, and maybe even a hat. Like just the times were so fucking different. Late 50s was kind of the very tail end of that whole era. So it's a fascinating time in American history. And I think that the first place that I've decided to really go for, research is I'm going to start watching a lot of movies from the mid to late 50s. Because if there's, I mean, I can't think of a better way to get a window into that era than seeing how the stars of that era were positioned, clothed, the dialogue. That's something that I'm really trying to nail, the dialogue itself. So I'm trying to watch a lot of throwback movies just to hear how they interacted, hear what words weren't used. Like, obviously, here's the deal. If you're making a movie in 1958 and somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, hey, thanks a lot," and the character were to say, "No worries," that would be
Right.
bullshit because people did not say no worries in 1958. In fact, if you told a gentleman in 1958, if the cashier said to you, you handed them your couple bucks and they say, "Oh, thank you, no worries," the guy would look at you and say, "What do you think I'm worried about? Who said I was worried? I'm thanking you. What was I worried about?" So it's just, there's a bunch of different colloquialisms that were used back then that they don't use now, and vice versa. So I'm watching a lot of movies for that, but I'm also talking to a lot of people that lived that era because here's the deal. We also know that in the 50s, movies were kind of, told with a layer of vanilla ice cream in front of them. You couldn't say fuck in a movie in 1955. You couldn't swear. There were certain things you couldn't get away with. And I have to imagine that kids, especially teenage boys in that era, were probably swearing like sailors. That's the thing. Like when we think back to the poly pure ass era of the 1950s, we don't realize that people were fucking back then. People were doing drugs back then. People were swearing back then. Any kind of shit you think that wasn't going on because it was so pure, bullshit. It was all going on. So that's the kind of story I want to tell. I want to kind of, yes, I want to show the true attempted purity of the era, but I want to know where all the dirt's at. Tell me the dirt, my boy.
Well, I like that, Tommy. Let me jump in with the aspect you talked about
Please.
2 or 3 minutes ago. I caught this thing last year, the last couple of years, where a bunch of movies that I saw that were period films all were using a new modern day cliche. And I saw it, for one example, the George Foreman movie, where, George is about to go fight a big fight, and another character says to him, "You got this." And Tommy, nobody was saying "you got this" is in mass as they do now until maybe
Nope.
10 years ago or less.
Totally.
And I saw a bunch of movies. The George Foreman one sticks out, but there was other ones that take place in other decades, and people are throwing that "you got this" fucking line to each other.
I
and
hate
and
that.
as the kids say, once again, Tommy, which I've said 3 times today, and I hate myself every time I say it, but I'm cringing every time they say "you got this," because it's such a
So
dumb
cringy.
line. it's a horrible line to say now, but back then, or the worst variation is I got this, and when these asshole characters say I got this or you got this, there's another game that I play in movies where the characters will say, "Are you okay?" And if you go see a movie, you can start counting the "Are you okays." It's a
Huh.
very lame. It's a very lame line because typically what happens is some traumatic little moment happens in a film. There's a fight or a chase scene. The two characters are all beat up, and then the side character says to the main character, or vice versa, usually, "Are you
Are
okay?"
you okay?
And then the asshole character who answers gets to basically get the movie back on track. Well, I severed my arm in the gunfight we just had, but I'm okay. Let's go get him, Tom Cruise. Mission Impossible 2 years ago had tons of "Are you okays?" So any screenwriters out there, if you got your little typewriters on, do not put "Are you okay?" or "Are you all right?" or "I got
Not
this" or "You got
okay.
this. It all gets
That's
wiped out
not
today.
that's not okay.
"Are you okay?" is not okay, and "I got this." Get it out.
Yeah, it's contemporary talk. It's funny. I remember watching movies with my dad when I was a kid, and if it was a period movie and someone said something that was kind of off, he would be like, "People didn't say that in those days," and I'd be like, "All right, shut up." You know, like, I was annoyed by him pointing that out as a kid, and
Yeah.
it's so why does this happen to us? Why is all the shit that you were annoyed to high heavens about your dad, and then it's just now I do them all. Like all the things that as a 13-year-old I would want to fucking throw my cereal at him from across the fucking table, and now I'm doing it all. Why is that?
Well, he was right. The Dr.
I
DiNucci
guess
was correct.
I guess that's what it comes down to. All
Yeah,
right,
he was
let's see
right the
what's
whole
going.
time.
Yeah, it's fucking bullshit. What do you got? A grape soda there, Mikey? What do we got? A little
No,
grape
buddy,
soda?
this is not. I'm
Show
drinking
us. Show us what you got.
sparkling water.
Oh, okay, it's a
Sparkling.
bubbly.
And no, I,
Blackberry
I will say
bubbly.
that free ad, but basically, Tommy, soda is so god awful for everybody. The
Oh, of
corn
course.
syrup, the sugar. I really don't drink soda much at all these days, but I am kind of addicted, and I've heard these things are addictive. These watered, flavored water beverages, basically. So it's fancy flavored water because it kind of has
You're
the
a
same
flavored
effect.
water.
Thank you. It has the same effect, and I got another one here. This is from last night,
Oh
pineapple.
my goodness.
So
Those are
it's
nice.
kind of
Those are
fun.
nice. That's a nice color combination. Those two colors together. Little,
Yeah.
little purple, little yellow. I like it. All right. Ariana says costume designers also have to figure out what the audience thinks was trendy due to popular movies like Flashdance, which was about dancers, so not everyone wore that, and what was actually trendy. It's true. And then it's kind of funny because Flashdance is a perfect example where a movie actually creates a fucking trend for
Right.
fashion. Because I remember, so like that movie was huge with my sister.
Sure.
Flashdance, like as little kids, she would just be like doing the fucking dance and, like a Steel Town Girl on a Saturday night. Okay. So she was getting after it with that movie. She loved dancing growing up. And I remember she'd always start rocking the cut off shoulders action, which was made famous by Flashdance. And I'm sure every woman who watched that movie probably rocked a shirt like that. And Mike, I think maybe we should start rocking some Flashdance
I
shirts.
don't
Why
know.
not? I don't know, man. I've got great traps and nice shoulders. Like I think that I'm gonna try to bring Flashdance shirts for the boys this summer.
What a feeling. Yeah. What was that Tom Hanks's son said? It's a white boy summer, so maybe it won't be a white boy.
Oh,
It
oh, I
won't it
don't like
won't
that at
be
all.
it won't be that's what Tom Hanks' son, he got into
Yeah,
some heat for
that's
saying that.
I hate Tom Hanks' son for many
Yeah.
reasons, and that him saying that was one of them. But yeah, let's drop your comments down if we get 10 thumbs up in the comments, I will do an entire episode in a Flashdance shirt this summer. But we need to get 10 likes. If
Wow.
this episode gets 10 likes, you hear that, guys? If this episode gets 10 likes, I will do an episode this summer in a Flashdance cutoff top. You heard it today. So
If it
tell,
gets eight likes, I won't.
if it gets 100 likes, Mike has to do it.
Oh, gee whiz.
So that's a 10 for me, And if somehow this episode gets up to 100 likes, Mike
Yeah.
will do an entire episode in a flash dance. And maybe that episode will do Ode to the 80s. We'll do 80s movies, and we'll both be rocking the flash dance tops. So get the likes out there. Tell your buddies, and let's keep it moving. And yes, Laza is right on the money. Flashdance had a great soundtrack. But Laza has a question for you, Mike. Are you okay? You got this?
I should
He's a
turn that
funny
around.
bastard.
I should turn that around on our buddy Laza there because he's overcoming a fever and a flu and
Oh,
an
geez, I'm sorry.
Australian winter or whatever is going on with him. So hopefully Laza's doing fine. And but yeah, Tommy, as far as this time travel and everything with movies, are there? Let me interject this: when people are writing a script or coming up with ideas for a script, are there certain eras? Two questions, I guess. I'll break it down. Are there certain eras you think people should either go towards or avoid? And then the second question is, are there writing pratfalls also to avoid or to enhance or to embrace? Like things where if you're writing a movie about the 1970s or the 1980s, like do this, but don't do that, or be careful not to do this. Take that question.
All right. So for the first one, what to avoid? Cowboy movies and Wild West movies are very hot right now. But it's tricky because anytime you make a Wild West movie or any kind of cowboy movie, what are you dealing with? Those giant, beautiful animals we call horses, which are beautiful and majestic and wonderful creatures. And I love horses, but the reality is it takes a whole army in itself to just manage horseplay on a movie set, to actually, now you're talking about your actors need to know how to ride. You're going to definitely need to get a stunt double for your actor to ride in some scenes. You have just a lot of extra hazards that could take place, a lot of extra dangers. You got to pay a bunch of extra people to get there. It's just a tremendous expense anytime you deal with horses. So I'd be afraid of doing those kind of movies. And if you did want to make, here's the advice, because I never say never, because that's for fucking losers. Okay. But if you did want to make a Wild West movie, I'd recommend making it about that lonesome cowboy, just that one cowboy who's like on his own adventure that way. And, when I say one cowboy, I really don't literally mean one, but I'm saying like if it was about just maybe one loner who's like trapped in the desert and he's trying to make his way through or whatever, and then maybe you encounter another few characters along the way, keep the story small so that way it's like, all right, we need 3 or 4 horses instead of like, I need 50 fucking horses for this movie. Like, what am I going to do? So just, if you do want to go in that direction, be careful and keep it condensed.
Well, how about this, Tony? How about a town in the Old West? And then the title of the movie is The Town with No Horses. And it's about a depressed community where all the horses have died. And we don't see them die. That they die in the exposition. So now these poor Westerners have to live in a town with no horses, and then something happens.
Mike, start writing, baby. Get the keyboard out. Town with No Horses coming to a theater near you. What was part 2 of that question, Mike? You said,
are there eras to embrace or avoid? Well, you just answered that one. And then, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just got it. Here's a couple of like things that you should do. I feel like this is really only if you're going to go back in time, but you can do it in the future too. But I always love, and I think people love this. It's like a common trope. It's a kind of flavor. When you go to an Italian restaurant, you're expecting the sauce to be good. You want some good gravy, right? So it's like when you're watching a period piece, you're expecting certain things, and I think one of the things people are expecting is some kind of reference to an actual event in history. You get what I'm saying? Meaning like we're making a movie set in the early 60s, and then boom, we walk by that electronics store and we see the JFK assassination on the news on several television sets. Like some kind of element that can get us into that era. And there's a number of reasons to do that. One of the reasons is news footage is free, basically, like, okay, or very inexpensive. You know, it's not too like it'll only cost you like maybe $1,000 instead of fucking $100,000. Like if you wanted to use a little piece of a clip from a movie in your period piece so that you could wink and nod at the era, that could cost you enough to buy a car. Whereas if you just want to buy, you know, if you're just looking for footage from the era and it's news footage, that might be $900, you know, because it's all just you're paying like licensing fees, filing fees, bullshit like that. Somewhere an archivist has to put all this shit together. So you're paying that service, but you're not really paying through the nose for it. It's not owned per se by anyone. I think that that's important to do. Think about if you're going to write a period movie, just have one or two. You know, we landed on the moon, 1969. You know, like whatever it might be. Like, you know, maybe have a scene where, and don't even make it about that. You know what I mean? You'll see in a lot of movies, like, you know, period movie. We start on the television set. We see the man, you know, we see Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, and then we pull out, and then we see the kids in the family room, and then shit, life's just happening. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just a nice way to kind of like set the scene. Things I wouldn't do, you know, I wouldn't like January 1965 on a calendar and see a page flip. You know, like don't be so fucking blatant with it. You know, part of what's fun about movies from the past is, you know, you're being subtle about it. And you can do that in the future too, man. I mean, listen, you know, if you were telling some kind of futuristic, like there's this TV show right now that kind of looks interesting. It's called Civil War. And it's all about like a future in the not too distant future. There's a civil war that breaks out in the United States. And, you know, that's a futuristic movie, but it's got me thinking like, and I haven't even seen the show, but I'm sure they show you like news clips from 2035 when the shit hits the fan, you know, like, so it's a great using news in an actual event, even if it is a fictitious event in the future. It's a great way to tell story and kind of wrap people into the era that you're watching.
That's a great point, Tommy. It kind of gives a story a sense of credibility, you know, even though the audience has suspended their disbelief, the magic what if of theater, which carries over to the cinema and books and novels as well. So, but having something set up as a news, you know, studio in a fictional movie does kind of give it some credibility, even though it's a narrative. Hey, there was special guest star here. I believe this is our buddy there, Larry, and he's saying hello. he's doing good.
Yeah, he's just here because he loves to talk about. He's a big history buff.
Yes,
believe it or not, he loves the past. He loves to, you know, just reminisce about being a younger cat. So I figured I'd have him do a run-in on the show.
He's very quiet. Normally he's got a meow or two in him. He's very chilled out today.
Well, you know, he's just been look at him. He's very pliable right now. He's so pliable. He's like clay. He's really just like a big clay fella.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna let him go back to you know, lately he's just been hanging out right on the desk here, right on the table. Just hangs out.
Fine.
I ain't mad at it. I like having my friend around. You know, I live alone, so it's nice to have a little companionship, a tail in your face once in a while.
I saw something like cats when they hop on your keyboard, they kind of are doing that on purpose because cats want attention. So if they see that someone's playing with their computer all day, the cat will block because they want you to pay attention to them. So they figure, well, this guy is always on this machine, whatever it is. They block it off, so you're gonna pet them.
They're smart enough to realize like that this machine has some bearing on our day to day. So it's like, well, if I get in the way of it, like, look, he's trying to get pet right now. Like he's actually coming up to my hand to be like, hey, how about some more of those pets?
Yeah.
So I mean, I can't deny the guy. I'm not going to deny him.
No.
Of some pets. What the hell? It's Tuesday. So yeah, guys, time travel. That's one of the things I'm doing to prep. Another thing that I'm doing to prep. Ready for this one, Mikey?
Sure. Ready.
I'm checking out a lot of. I fucking love the 50s, and I'm checking out a lot of like Saturday Evening Posts from the 1950s and magazines, Life magazine, Time magazine. What are people like back then? Like, what does the world look like? what palette is being painted with throughout this fucking era? What's the color scheme? What are the popular color schemes? Mike, it's a color scheme game, brother. So I'm really getting, into the era and just kind of seeing the reality, because that shit's real, right? It's not a movie, like Time Magazine, Popular Mechanics, artwork. Here's another thing, Mike, and I'll tell everybody here on And Action, and I don't think this is going to leak out. I don't think it's going to hurt me, because I really wanted to keep this a secret. But I'm going to tell just our And Action people, because it's a little bit of an And Action plus Larry exclusive.
Okay.
But Mike, one of my dreams has always been, I love Norman Rockwell. He's one of my favorite painters on the planet. And one of my dreams is to make a movie where I actually steal the frames from some Norman Rockwell paintings and recreate them in a film. And Norman Rockwell was very prolific for many years, but the 50s were, seemingly like a especially prolific decade for him. And I love his artwork. I love how he depicted the era. So he's got a lot of football paintings. He's got a lot of paintings of just teens in the 50s, at the ice cream shop. So I'm excited to maybe 3 or 4 times. I don't know how many times I'll be able to do it, but I would love for some Norman Rockwell buff like myself to like recognize that, be like, oh wow, that's that painting right there, and he just created it for just a few frames as we open up a scene. That's my goal, Mike. I'm doing it.
Very interesting, buddy. Very interesting. Yeah, that's a good concept. I like that. And Tommy, it's interesting because there's always another element to all this time travel, is that there's an element, and you touched on this before, between what the media would paint a picture as and what the average person's kind of living. And I think about our times, 2024, if someone were to see us, they'd think, oh, everyone was Kim Kardashian, or everybody was crazy, like, Kanye, and everybody ran around with a Taylor Swift t-shirt, like there would be a misrepresentation, because the media, which is selling stuff, is often playing some things out of proportion than they really are with people's,
there's an agenda, is what you're saying. There's some kind of agenda.
There's a sales agenda. So, I mean, not every single person's running around concerned about Taylor Swift and Kelsey Grammer or whoever, Kelsey, doing their thing, but the media in 2024 would have us believe that. So I think it's also important to kind of, like we said earlier about your friend Maura, the costume designer, tone things back to some level of reality, because not everybody in 1977 is walking around with double thumbs up like Fonzie.
No, I think that's a great way to, again, like when you're looking, you can't just stick to movies. You got to see what real life was like in that era. So I'm excited to go on this journey, guys. I'm excited to go back to 1958. I really can't wait. It's a football movie too, but it's not really a football movie in the sense that football's in the backdrop. But I'm even excited. I certainly don't want to go into the weeds on a football discussion, but just the game of football was played so differently in 1958. I mean, that was a Warriors game. Like, we're talking about very limited padding. The shoulder pads were smaller. The helmets were, made of very, very thick plastic, but they weren't really doing a whole hell of a lot. You might have had like one bar across your face mask, maybe one. And it was just a rough and tumble game. And these, the penalties and all the rules that have been created over the last 70 years have been created to keep players alive, basically, to keep players from getting fucking severely injured. Because back in the 50s, you could just lay someone out. You could just use your body as a projectile and use your head as a spear. It's just fucking lay them out in lavender, as they used to say.
And I would think, Tommy,
a lot.
Yeah, I would think a few things that come to mind first, and I'm, this, but others might. There was no 2-point conversion going back in the 1950s in the NFL, or maybe in college football. I'm not sure when the 2-point came in, but for the most part, it was just 6 points for a touchdown, 1 point for a extra point kick. But the 2-point play The
Is that
2-point
true?
play wasn't around till I think the late 1990s, I believe, in the
I don't know
NFL.
about that. Let me
I
look that
do
up.
know about that. The NFL didn't bring in the 2-point thing until like 99 or maybe 2000,
No
maybe
way.
95. Yeah. You didn't know that, Tommy?
I didn't
Two
know
point
that. Wow, look at this. The NFL
95,
adopted the
96.
2-point conversion rule in 1994,
There you
25
go.
years after the merger. Tom
Yeah.
Tupa, who played for the Patriots, I believe, at one point, scored the first 2-point conversion in NFL history, running a fake 1-point attempt. How about that, Mike? Well, I'll tell you what, I stand corrected.
Go back
I
to your
thought that was,
script, buddy. Get all those 2-point conversions out if you had
I
any.
gotta I gotta erase them all now.
The other
Wow.
thing I'd say, buddy, is you talk about the physicality of the
I,
sport.
I
Well,
love what he said. I do know about that.
yeah, well, I know some things,
I
buddy.
know. I go, I don't know about that. You go, I do know about that.
You want to talk about you talk about the physicality, but the reality is back then, if you got your concussed, you just got your bell rung. You know what I mean? There was no doctor, helping you out, or there was no protocol if somebody got smashed in
Brother,
there.
in 1958, CTE was the abbreviation for the state of Connecticut.
Right. That's
There
it.
was
Yeah.
no there was no brain injuries. If you told
Right.
someone CTE, they'd be like, "What's this got to do with Connecticut?"
Yes.
Shake it off. Yeah. And again, it was a very macho man's dominated era when it was. Here's what you have to understand about the 50s. Okay, all the teenagers in the 50s, their coaches and the men that they looked up to, their older brothers, their older uncles and cousins, they all fought in Germany, in Japan. They were all in Europe. They were all fighting during World War II. These were combat hardened men that had killed before with their bare fucking hands. Okay. So you had this whole generation of young men being in the 50s, being raised by these guys who were smoking Luckies and killing people on the beach and then just coming home back to normalcy. With no therapy, right, guys?
Right.
There was no
They didn't
such
talk
thing
about
as
their
therapy.
feelings.
There was no such thing as therapy.
There was no
There was no
Dr.
such thing as
Phil.
no. You killed several men in combat while watching your friends' heads explode right next to you, and then you came home and you had a family and kids and you went to work at the factory or whatever and you lived life, and all that shit got kind of taken out on the football field, and it was, oh, you got a concussion. Walk it off, son. Get back in there. We need you. It was a different fucking time. And that's really what we're all talking about today. It's time. Time is man time, right? That sounds like a funny stoner thing to say. But time is just such a crazy fucking thing, isn't it, Mike?
Well, I'll say this, buddy. Once again, for the fourth time, kids these days, you know, for me, buddy, like 2005 is like a snap of the fingers. But now we're seeing period films that take place in 2005. Like, oh, it's an early 2000 comedy.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
it's a 2010 romantic comedy. But the older you get, these time for 10, 15, 20 years seem like nothing. And to me, honestly, pop culture, with the exception of social media, hasn't really changed that much in the last 20 years. But if you look at 1980 to 2000, that seems like two different worlds. But
Oh
2000
yeah.
to
No, you just said it, Mike. I think the biggest sort of like the divider that you put down at the grocery store on the
yeah,
aisle, the biggest divider between like current times and past times nowadays are it's social media. Because I actually, you remember, I'm part of that generation, so are you, Mike, where like we were kind of adults when social media came out. Like I was like, I think 17, 18, 19, maybe even a little older than that, early 20s. So I can remember some fun times and being like, "Oh man, I didn't even post about that because that wasn't a fucking thing." Like I remember, let me make a little correction. Social media came out when I was in like my mid 20s, and I remember like, right when I was 21, like we went to a Dave Matthews concert. It was a fucking amazing time. We had a limo, we partied, all this shit. There are no posts about that evening because that just wasn't a thing. You know what I mean? And it's kind of funny to I think back now in the history of my life of like like when I go way, way back, that's how it's like, woof, we weren't even posting about shit back then. But I got to say, I am thrilled about it because, it is nice that, we're artists, Mike, right? We are creators. So when you got to promote something, it's nice to have several different avenues to go promote your shit. But yeah, I think social media is the big measuring stick of eras, if you will.
Yeah, and like I said, buddy, the 1980s to 2000s so much different. 2000, four to now is so much different. But also, as far as sports goes, I got to throw this in there. There was no 3-point shot on the NBA until like 81, 82, 83, maybe 82. So, I mean, if you're going to make a basketball movie that takes place in 1975 or 1965, there's no Steph Curry's out there. Everyone's going for two. That's it. So things
And it's
change.
funny now, Mike, because I know you're a basketball fan, and I've been watching more basketball than ever this year, mainly because the Celtics are on a fucking tear. But I feel like all they do is shoot threes nowadays. I feel like that's become like the fucking game.
Some people have said that that's ruined the game. That's Steph Curry, as great as he is, his influence in putting the emphasis on the 3-point shot. People miss the physicality, and they really just feel it's not as exciting to watch because it's just a 3-point contest with glorified, a game, but it's like more or less who's got the better skill shot guy. And people are losing interest. But I guess we'll save that for a future episode where we bitch about sports.
Yes. Kim Kalen dropped in. Kim says, "What's up, Kim? Good to see you this week." Kim says, "Sorry I'm late. You don't ever have to be sorry. We're just happy you watch along."
But you get time
I'm gonna
travel
go
by
back
watching.
and watch. I love the yes. You can actually time travel through the glory of the little scrub tab there, guys. Also, I'm sorry in advance. Larry got his hair all over me this week, so I apologize in advance. I'm all Larryed up, but he's sprawled out on my desk here. Here's what I got going on for the rest of the day. I'm about to jump into an editing session for the movie that I made down in Mississippi. I'm getting very close to a picture lock on that, so I'm very excited. And we're gonna go through now and just kind of we watched the whole movie yesterday, and now we're gonna go through and there's a few shots that I might have missed that I want to make sure get in there. Um, and so we're gonna go through that today. And later on, I'm gonna do a writing session with Ariana, who's one of our and action fam right here. We're writing a Christmas movie. Imagine that. We're gonna go into the holiday season. So
Yeah.
guys, can't thank you enough for watching along. We would really love if you shared this in any which way, shape, or form. Send it to a friend that's into filmmaking. Say, hey, give these guys a watch. You might just like it. You might learn something. You might have a laugh. You might be a cat person. You get to see Larry. And as always, reminder, feel free to drop down any questions that you may have on anything filmmaking related. Mike and I have access to these comments all the time. So if you happen to be watching this now and you had that question you were always afraid to ask and you didn't know, or if you're about to embark on your own filmmaking journey and you'd like some advice from Mike and I, drop it down in the comments. Tell us what you're about to get into, and Mike and I will talk about it on the show. Towards the end of the show, we'll do a little wrap up. Very big week. I'm excited, Mike. I'm going to be shooting interviews for that documentary, Heart of Knightsville, on Thursday. We've got a shoot coming up, so I'm pretty stoked for that. It's all coming together, Mike. Like I said, man, and this isn't a bad thing, so I don't want people to think I'm complaining, but the month of April is already here. We are April 2nd. My calendar's like fucking chuck full for like the whole month already. I'm like, God damn, what is happening? And one more note for all that. Mike, I'm pretty excited because on Friday, I'm taking a little trip to Philadelphia and I'm going to be going to WrestleMania 40. So I've always wanted to go to WrestleMania. It's kind of been a bucket list thing for me. And I don't use that term very loosely. I don't have a fucking bucket list. In fact,
Sure.
I've always thought the term bucket list alone was kind of dumb. But to me, like going to WrestleMania, it's kind of cool. 40th anniversary. The Rock's going to be there. So heading down to Philly, going to enjoy some cheesesteaks while I'm down there. I hear Geno's is the place to go to. And what we've decided to do, Mike, and I know you're going to like this because Mike, and I say this with the utmost respect, you are my most knowledgeable wrestling, not just friend, but person that I know. You are
All right.
the out of all the people, and I'm talking about people on podcasts that are actually deemed experts, hosts and whatnot. Mike knows. Mike will fucking school them. Um, Mike is a savant of wrestling. So we decided next week, since yeah, it's not a movie, but there are so many filmmaking principles utilized in the production of WrestleMania. Next week, we're going to talk all about WrestleMania. I'm going to tell you about my trip. I'm going to tell you about my experience, and we're going to get into it. So, if you're not a wrestling fan, don't get nervous. Don't skip this one because we're not going to be talking about matches. We're not going to be talking about the finish or how anything went down in the ring. I mean, we might, touch upon that loosely, but really, we're going to just talk about my experience seeing what the production elements were like. I mean, we're talking the craziest pyro you could imagine. We're talking, God knows how many fucking cameras are going to be floating around the arena. There's probably 30 different camera positions. I'm excited to just see what a spectacle it is. To me, it's right up there with going to the Super Bowl. So next week on episode 76, we're going to be talking all about WrestleMania 40 and my trip to Philadelphia. Can't wait for that.
Well, there is a film tie-in, obviously, because The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, Rocky Maivia, Flex Cavana, he'll be wrestling on the first night. So, I mean, the number one movie star in the world, once again, Tommy, kids these days may not realize that back in the 90s, The Rock was a wrestler. He wasn't just the Mummy and the Game Plan and all these wonderful films, but he got his start as a professional wrestler, following in his father's footsteps, and he'll be in the main event of the first night with repercussions for the second night's main event. And I think that's an interesting thing. Why would a 50-year-old, billionaire hop in the ring to bounce around and risk because no matter if he wrestles for 5 minutes, he's still risking injury. And the last time he wrestled at age 40, he tore a chest muscle. So, I mean, he must have a real passion for this if he's willing to put his body on the line to wrestle.
Well, Mike, there's no question about it. We've heard this been said many times. Live performance is a special drug. It's like nothing you can get on a movie set. You can get a little bit of that on a movie set because you're still performing for like a room full of people, or maybe a bunch of background actors are there. There could be maybe hundreds of people. But to be in an arena where you're performing in front of 50, 60, 70,000 people, to get that initial immediate pop, applause, reaction, cheer, whatever what you want to call it. I mean, you can't harness that kind of adrenaline and excitement. So I think it's amazing. It shows you that even a guy like The Rock, who, we all say this, if I had as much money as The Rock did, I'd be on a fucking beach somewhere. Like, you couldn't get a hold of me. You just wouldn't be able to find me. It would just be like, where did Tommy go? I don't know. Wherever the fuck he wants to. But to think that you're right, he has to go through all this. It shows you what a drug it really is, and that feeling that being in front of that live audience really gives you. He's the most electrifying man in sports entertainment, and there's a reason for that. He really loves it. He loves that feeling. So I'm excited to see what he's got going on firsthand. I can't wait. It's kind of, like I said, a lifelong dream to go to WrestleMania, and here we are. It's this time next week, we'll be talking all about it. If you haven't already, guys, please hit that subscribe button. Make sure the notifications bell's on so that anytime Mike and I come on here to shoot the breeze, you get to hear about it. And again, I'm on Instagram. Feel free to go follow me on Instagram at Tom DiNucci. And lots of exciting updates coming because, like I said, April is just booked fucking solid. And I'm pretty excited. This month's going to go by real fast. So we'll see.
You're like Dory Funk Jr. in 1968, buddy, defending the world title in all the different territories.
I just got all these airline tickets and hotel tickets, and I just don't know which city I'll be in and which night. I don't know if I can take it. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. And we hope to see you next week when we talk about WrestleMania. Thanks, guys. Bye. Bye. Travel through time. Be time travelers.